All right, here we go. Mics are hot. Ready, camera one. Take one. We are rolling. Ready in 3, 2.
This Soonerscoop.com video is streaming in crystal clear 4K resolution on YouTube thanks to Enjoy Vision in Oklahoma City. If you're ready to see the rest of the world just as clearly, get your fresh perspective at Enjoy Vision. Enjoy Vision. This is where Sooner Scoop LASIX. Hello and welcome back. Eddie Radosevich, George Stoya here from the Soonerscoop.com studios. Oklahoma opening up spring football on Thursday. As we talked about on Monday here on the Soonerscoop.com YouTube channel, a media bonanza coming up on Wednesday. We're going to hear from John Mateer. We're going to hear from Brent Venables. We're going to hear from Jim Nagy, as well as the other 34 new faces to the Oklahoma football program. Plenty of coverage coming up on Soonerscoop.com. We'll have a bunch of stuff here, obviously, instant reaction from tomorrow morning when we talk to Brent Venables and Jim Nagy, as well as John Mateer, as well as every interview that we're going to do over the next, 24 hours. You can see all that stuff on Soonerscoop.com's editorial page as we put those interviews up throughout the season. This is going to serve as basically a spring primer for everything OU football going into Thursday and everything that's going to come out of it. I know there's news out there that we're going to have to talk about in terms of the Oklahoma spring game and the cancellation, the Crimson Combine that Georgia is going to participate in coming up on spring game weekend. But before we get into all of that, and we'll talk to Josh McCuistion as well, George has it right here. That's it. That's the football Oklahoma is using. The official 2025 OU Jordan Fly Elite football has just dropped from our good friends, as you see behind us, Big Game Football Factory, and you can get yours today. BigGameUSA.com/Sooners. BigGameUSA.com/Sooners. If you want the exact football that Oklahoma will be using this season, signature maize, crimson Jumpman, and an interlocking OU logo, iconic symbols of innovation and performance, and even some nice features here with the lacing this year, with the red lacing coming from USA Big Game Football Factory. Every ball with a certificate of authenticity. This isn't just a football. It's a piece of Oklahoma history. That's literally the football that they will be using this season. All you got to do, once again, go to BigGameUSA.com/Sooners if you are interested. It's a good ball this year that Oklahoma will be using throughout practice when they start on Thursday. Let's go ahead and bring in the great Josh McCuistion from Houston HQ. And there was a little bit of news on Tuesday with the announcement from Oklahoma. The spring game, as we know it, is dead. The spring game is not going to be played this year. It will be a Crimson Combine, George, and I know that there's a lot of people that have felt a certain way about it. Josh, hello. How are we? I know that you've lost a lot of sleep over the last 24 hours since Oklahoma's spring game has been canceled.
Yeah, guys, I've got the whiskey over my shoulder here. Happy to pour some out, just as a loss for red-white games of our youth. But I mean, guys, I don't know about you. I struggle to get really wound up about this. I understand it's a connection for fans. I get that. I do get why fans are going to miss it. But, mad or infuriated, you just got to read, look around college football. This isn't an exclusive to Oklahoma thing.
I think it's one of those deals for me. I was kind of not heartbroken about it because I love bitching about this spring game, and it usually coincides with Masters weekend. It's not so much like the game, and really it's not even so much about the guys that you know about. I do like seeing some of the freshmen out there.
Yeah.
And I love the weekend just in general because for the most part, the weather's usually pretty good around that time of the year. It's a good time for a lot of people to come back to campus, whether it be alumni or former players, like we've seen over the last couple years with the Heisman trophies that have been debuted, whether it be Kyler or Baker, whomever. It just sucks. It's kind of like that final straw of yesteryear and what college football was, and it was kind of like the one bearing that you had, and now that's ripped away.
I think in the grand scheme of things, the game itself, it doesn't really matter, right? I understand canceling it just because it's, you risk injury or whatever, but I do think it's coaches being paranoid about, our players are going to get poached because teams are watching our spring game. That's going to happen. That's going to happen regardless.
Bull.
I think that's a lie.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think it is too.
It's a nice facade to hang behind and say, oh, yeah, this is one of the reasons. Let's be honest. They just don't want to do it. They're going to still have scrimmages.
Yeah.
You're not going an entire spring without a scrimmage.
And, I still think, and I think, for the fans, I think that they should rightfully be a little upset just because you only get so many opportunities to see your team. And and in today's college football world, you have so many new guys. Like you said, 34 guys that we're going to get to meet tomorrow. The fans should get the opportunity to see those guys. And that's why I'm a big proponent of, okay, you're not going to have the spring game. Open up a practice. Let fans come out and see you practice for a day. Then and you could adjust that practice to be like, you know what, we're only going to do some one-on-one drills in this practice and maybe have like a 10, 20-minute team period. And that way you're not showing that much. And you don't have to show a whole lot in that practice. That's the part that, if we're going to go to this NFL model, and I tweeted this yesterday, if they're going to do all these things that are NFL-esque and have OTAs and move all this stuff and get rid of the spring game, well, then let's be like the NFL and open up training camp. I mean, training camp across the NFL is open to fans. Not all of it, but usually, 5 to 10 practices are open where anybody can come, and it's free. And that's the thing that I'm like, I understand the fans' frustrations because, and not everybody gets to go to games.
Sure.
Not everybody gets to go and buy a ticket to the Alabama game. And so maybe the spring game is the one chance to get to go see those guys. So I like that they're still doing something. I'm going to hold my judgment on what based on the press release. I'll be completely honest. It doesn't excite me whatsoever. And I don't see how it's a huge, thing for fans to come do. Maybe they make it fun, but it's just I think it's a little disappointing just because of the way that college football's going.
And I think that, and there's been a lot of people in the Crimson Corner on the message boards talking about, if you're going to charge people to come to something like that, have all that money go to NIL.
Yeah.
Like, why couldn't you do that? It seems like that's almost too easy. I don't know why you wouldn't be doing it. And, like you said, George, in a world where, let's be honest, universities are going to their fan base more than ever and saying, we need money, NIL, this, NIL, that. I have no idea why there's not a connection between the two.
Well, and it's
and then you're shutting them out, like you said.
Exactly. It's like you're asking more from the fans, and then you're
taking
away. It's like if you're gonna ask more, give them more. Allow them to come see practice. And I think that there's a lot of people at OU that feel the same way. And I think that this is partly coaches being a little bit paranoid. You saw Matt Rule come out and talk a lot about it, Steve Sarkisian. And I think, Sark kind of alluded that it was a little bit different for Texas in the sense that, hey, they just played, however many games, 16, 17 games. They don't need to have a spring game where, it's just more on the players. So I understand it, but I think also from an administration perspective, I think some of them would like to still have the spring game because of the money and also just the fan engagement of it.
Sure. It's tough. What were you going to say, Josh? I cut you off.
No. I was going to say, first off, Eddie, congratulations. This shirt is not an accident on your Masters freedom.
I do
on
like
that weekend. So I know how much that means to you. But what I would also say is kind of like what you're talking about, George, where you're talking about, open up some OTAs and some of that stuff that they can do in the off season. Well, for those, that I know a lot of our fans don't really, follow the NFL all that closely. They also have team like scrimmages and stuff.
Yeah.
Like, you could do stuff where Tulsa comes down I-44 and you have a, kind of a heavy practice one day, where it really is just a scrimmage for 45 minutes or an hour or something along those lines that you could give to the fans. And they could have that moment to where you're getting something out of it. It's still visible. And it's probably better than anything we get out of the spring game anyways, because guys, like we were talking about in some of our group chats, everybody gets jacked up about the spring game. Like, oh, this is going to be great. And then about 10 minutes in, you're like, oh yeah, this sucks every year. Like you just kind of forget that it's a disappointing product. But when those guys have a chance to go hit somebody else in the middle of May or April or whenever, the schedule would align the best, I think that could be really enthralling for people to just get a taste of what it might look like.
But it's that, that long pass from Austin Kendall or whomever that emerges from the spring that you're like, damn it, that guy's going to be a somebody.
Who's the all-time spring game guy? I mean, Dominic Whaley,
man.
didn't he have a big spring game?
Yeah, but he burst onto the scene and then actually, had a little bit of longevity just in terms of he was a really good running back there for a minute.
Marcellus Sutton,
Marcellus Sutton had a nice one. I want to say Jazz Reynolds had a nice spring game at one point, Josh.
Well, yeah, guys, the guy that's going to retire as the king literally is Deion Burks. I mean, like, how do you do more than he did last year? He goes out on top.
No doubt about it. Carrie said Jermaine Hardison had a really nice spring game. That might have been predated before my birth, but and I know it wasn't. It was back I was in college. Yeah, I was basically in college when all of that happened. But it just sucks. For the most part, by mid-April, you're just ready to kind of get that little taste of football and to have that somewhat ripped away. Who knows what this Crimson Combine is going to look like? And I do think that, I was telling some people on the message board, it almost seems like if you have a kid, maybe this would be a nice day to bring them down and have them be able to get up close with some of the players and stuff like that. But it does suck for, I think, a lot of people, the majority of Oklahoma fans that, have enjoyed what it is over the last couple of years, or, obviously Brent's first year when they got 75,000 into the stadium. So it sucks. I agree with everybody else out there. It really does suck. Hoping for a comeback offensively this year. Let's get into a little bit of some storylines going into the spring. Oklahoma opening up practice on Thursday. Speaking of comebacks, you had the best comeback of all time yesterday.
Who's that?
Casey Anthony. Did you see the video?
I did see that.
Do you like
Congrats
that?
to her.
Yeah, congrats to her for a baby killer. But other than that, hot. Still got it. Let's talk OU football, though. Let's talk OU football. I didn't mean to get us sidetracked. I think that when you're talking about storylines going into the spring, why are you so red? Do you know something else that we don't know about Casey?
I don't know anything. Let's get to John Mateer and Ben Arbuckle.
R.I.P. baby Kaylee. John Mateer, Ben Arbuckle. Storyline wise, you got to start there, obviously. I think that everything that goes into the 2025 football season is going to begin and end with these two guys coming in from Pullman, Washington. How are they going to be able to fix this offense? And I have no idea because there's a lot of question marks around everything else that happens, but it starts with those two guys.
Yeah, for sure. And, it's something where we haven't even gotten to really talk to John, so I'm excited to hear from him on Wednesday, but just the chemistry between him and Ben and how much that can really help them this spring. You and I talked about it yesterday, Eddie, but I wanted to ask you, Josh, like from a quarterback and an offensive coordinator standpoint, when they were installing their system this spring, how beneficial do you think that will be having those two guys, kind of on the same page and really kind of teaching what they want to do to everyone else?
I think it's just massive because it's not a situation where as Ben Arbuckle sitting down and he's saying, okay, this is what it looks like. And he's drawing out the plays. And okay, this is what you're going to do out of this formation. This is what we'll do if they show us this coverage. He really can get down. He can lay out the broad scope. Like this is what it all looks like. And then John Mateer is going to come in and say, okay, look, they're going to show you this coverage. If they give us this look, sneak inside just a little bit, take a little off this route. Like there's all these little finer points that they don't have to learn on the fly. They don't have to learn with a new quarterback who maybe doesn't, and it's not to say that Ben Arbuckle doesn't know those things, but John Mateer is, it's the chicken or the, what is it, the chicken or the pig? Like the pig's committed. John Mateer is out there taking the blows. He wants you to be here so he can get rid of the ball that half a second quicker so he doesn't have to take a big hit. So there's a lot of things like that I think it's just as good as I think Ben Arbuckle is. Like I really like what he does on offense. I thought it was a great hire by Oklahoma. I think this was, it made a lot of sense even without John Mateer. But to be able to bring him along and to have that information that he can give to the players, and the receivers are going to respond to it because, I want to be where you're going to throw me the ball. Okay, cool. Like I can do that. So I think it just works on a lot of different levels, and I think it expedites the entire process.
I think one thing, too, that we haven't talked enough about is the quarterback coach that they brought with him. And I think, you look back last year, it just felt like the quarterbacks never really got better, right? That was an extreme problem, and the development there. Having somebody like John Kuzowski, I think that's how you say his last name,
Your attempt better than mine.
Yeah, I think that'll be a huge benefit, not only for John Mateer, who's obviously worked with him,
sure,
but think about a guy like Michael Hawkins,
100%.
Who, I think we saw some growth from him a year ago, but to have somebody like him, as well as Ben Arbuckle, to kind of take him under his wing, and John Mateer to that extent. Last year, not to say Jackson Arnold, wasn't a leader or a guy that was clearly, the number one guy, but he hadn't done it before. John Mateer has, and I think Michael Hawkins can learn from that, and I think Michael Hawkins can also push John Mateer, and so I'm excited for his development. Cole Gonzalez too. We haven't talked a ton about him, and probably won't see a ton of him next year if things go the right way. But he's played a lot of football,
sure.
And I think he fits in what Arbuckle wants to do. So it just feels like that room heading into this spring is so much different than a year ago. You can draw some parallels to new quarterback, new offensive coordinator, and yeah, Jackson was familiar with Seth Luttrell, but it's different. I mean, there's been so much more success that Arbuckle and Mateer can lean on and say, this is what we did a year ago, and this is how we're going to do it at Oklahoma.
It's a little bit scary, just in terms of something that we had talked about yesterday, George, when you're talking about this offense. It feels like a lot of the stuff that we're talking about going into this spring is the same stuff that we were talking about a year ago.
Yeah.
Why is it going to be different? If somebody were to ask you, why is this going to be different this time around with this group of guys than what they did or didn't do a year ago, what would you say?
Well, they've done it before. That's the biggest thing, is like they have the experience. Like, we couldn't point to Jackson Arnold and Seth Luttrell and say, oh, well, they've done it.
Yeah.
Right.
It was
like
a lot of hope. It was a lot of hope that you're going to build off of that Alamo performance. You're not going to turn the ball over X many times.
Right. And I think that where you can point to and say, look, John Mateer and Ben Arbuckle had one of the best offenses in the country a year ago. And I understand that it wasn't against the schedule that they're about to face this year, but they can at least point to something and say, hey, we had a full season of success. Like, we understand each other. And, it's not even last year, but the year before that with Cam Ward. Like, Ben Arbuckle has, I know it's not a long history, but has a history of success. John Mateer's been in the system for a couple of years now. Like, I think that's why you get a little. I'm not saying that means that they're going to be able to replicate it exactly, and OU's going to be a top 20 offense next year. But I think it's safe to say they're going to be better than the offense was a year ago, because it can't be much worse. And also, again, I think the experience of, look, when you have two guys that, Ben Arbuckle maybe doesn't even have to say the full play to that Mateer can, understand what he's asking him to do. That's a huge advantage. And I think that it can rub off on, obviously they have a lot of new guys at receiver, some new guys on the offensive line, but I think that that's why this spring is so pivotal, as those guys can kind of learn from the way those two communicate.
Josh, in terms of selling the hopium for the fans out there, why would you say that this thing's going to be different this time around?
Eddie, I told you yesterday, and
I was going to keep it in confidence.
I'm starting to believe, and I don't really like it. Like, I'm not comfortable with that. I don't know if it's just that time of year and hope springs eternal and all that crap. I don't know. But I am. Like, I'm starting to look at this. I'm like, okay, a little here, a little there. And part of it is rooted in what George was just talking about. This offense doesn't have to go be a top 15 unit for this team to be pretty good and vastly improved. It needs to be a top 40 unit. Like, it just better, just serviceable would be a huge step in the right direction and would cure a lot. Like, I was just looking at it, guys. OU finished 97th last year in scoring offense. I think it right around 24 points, something right in that ballpark. If they got to 47th, that's almost a touchdown a game. And if you're getting one more score a game, Oklahoma's, like, you look at a few of those, you're like, okay, maybe Missouri bounces differently. Like, you start going to listen, maybe last year's 7-5, 8-4, which is an entirely different storyline going into this year as opposed to what actually happened. Now, again, this is all a lot of conjecture, but we know that Oklahoma has a backbone. They have a defense that we know is going to be pretty good. Like, how good, I think you could argue a little bit, and I think there's going to have to be some growth in the secondary and at linebacker and some of those things. But when you can start and say, this is one of the better defensive lines in the SEC, that's a great starting point. Now go from there. Okay, now you've got an experienced quarterback. So there's some stuff I'm starting to buy into. I like everything I hear, and I know, you guys have talked about hearing similar stuff. It sounds like John Mateer is a guy that everybody's really responded to. There's been good feedback on just what people are hearing and, kind of what the response to his, nature has been. Like, I think people like him, I guess, in the easiest way to put that. So, I, again, I feel like I'm saying it, and I'm like, in November, someone's going to play this clip for me on Twitter, and I'm going to be pissed off at myself for saying it. So I'm sorry, future Josh. I don't know what to say. I just am starting to believe a little bit.
For that to happen, for Oklahoma to take those steps offensively, they're going to have to be better up front.
Yep.
Offensive line, I think it was well documented. The struggles that they had a year ago, you look at the back end of the schedule, and they did start playing better. And I think that we talked about it here on the SoonerScoop.com YouTube channel, just in terms of Heath Ozida, Logan Howland. Okay, this is starting. Maybe the light's starting to come on for these guys. It is going to be interesting, and we've spoken about just all of the guys that they're bringing in. Obviously, Michael Fasusi, Ryan Foje, Darius Afalava. That group of guys is going to be maybe somebody that could add a little bit of depth to this group. Let's just talk about position battles going into the spring, because obviously maybe Logan Howland. We will probably hopefully find out on Wednesday what exactly he's going to be able to do, if anything at all, during the spring. How's Jacob Sexton coming back from injury? Basically from missing the last 3 or 4 games of last season with the knee injury sustained in Oxford. Where do you guys kind of start at when you're talking about just outright position battles? Does it start at guard, at the guard position? Maybe not so much Heath Ozida, but on the other side with Fabechi Wewu, as well as maybe an Eddie Pierre-Louis breaking onto the scene.
Yeah, I think guard's extremely interesting because you have guys coming back that played for you last year, but you have younger guys that could maybe steal those spots, right? Like you saw Fabechi Wewu last year. You kind of know what you got from him. You wonder, can he take a step, because it feels like he probably needs to keep his job. And then you have Heath Ozida, who played quite a bit last year, especially down the stretch, and Jacob Sexton, who I just don't really know where they're going to end up playing him. He played a lot of guard and tackle a year ago, coming off the injury. I don't even know if he's going to be available in the spring. So I think guard is extremely interesting, Eddie. I think that you hope that you come out of the spring and Eddie Pierre-Louis is a name that everybody's like, well, he's going to start. It's just a matter of where, like which guard spot is he going to be at? Because if that is the case, then I think you're starting to feel pretty good about this thing up front. Now, I think the tackle, both tackle spots is really interesting, especially with Logan Howland being out. Because I would say, before Logan Howland had his shoulder injury, he was clearly going to be maybe the starting left tackle going into this season. But with him being out, does that open the door for someone else? And then the right tackle spot, as we know, a year ago, is kind of a rotating door, and you bring in 2 guys, and Derek Simmons and Luke Baklenko, like, could they compete for one of those tackle positions? So it feels like every position other than center, who I would assume Troy Everett is your starter there.
Sure.
And I don't even know who the backup is at center, but maybe Josh Ayasosa. But every other position, it feels kind of open for grabs.
It would seem to, and let us not forget that, the Oklahoma, the musical chairs along the offensive line kind of started in the spring last year when you lose Troy Everett on basically, I think it was the second day of practice, or the first day of practice. You want to get through this thing healthy. Josh, just in terms of offensive line overall, I know that you have some thoughts on Eddie Pierre-Louis and the guard position. What's kind of like your biggest, I guess, storyline just for that group in general? Is it can some of these freshmen come in and be immediate contributors?
I think there are 2 that really stick out to me. And the one everybody's going to want to talk about is Michael Fasusi. Where is he at? Is he ready? Because, guys, there's no question. He's the most talented offensive lineman in that room right now. Is he ready to be Kelvin Banks, Will Campbell, these guys that, we're about to watch after 3 years of college go be first-round picks in the NFL draft? Michael has that kind of ability. To me, I think it's a mass question. It's a strength question. I think everything I have heard is he is absolutely everything they wanted him to be, from a information, the way he wants to learn, the way he wants to improve. Like, he's doing all the stuff they're asking him to do. So, like, I think that he couldn't have started off on a better foot. It's just a matter of, okay, once you have to put it to practice, once things are live in practice, what does that look like? And there's no way to know. I mean, like, we're just going to have to see what that does. The other thing, Eddie, and really, I think it kind of been around in the back of my brain, but you said something a second ago, or I think George said something a second ago, and it kind of put it there for me, was with all the rotation they've done. We know Bill Bedenbaugh loves to kind of mess with the lineup, see what's what. Like, and I know people think that that's a singular thing. That is something that a lot of offensive line coaches believe in because it's one of the few positions where they really have to work so in such synchronized order. Like you've got to find your best five rather than your five best individuals. Like, and I know that's cliche, but it's cliche for a reason. But what I'm trying to get at is what I think is interesting is he's had a chance to look at so many of these guys at so many positions. Is he going to feel that need this year? Like I kind of know what Jacob Sexton is at left tackle. I kind of know what he is at left guard. I kind of know what he is at right tackle. Like, is it going to be more of, okay, I'm pretty confident of maybe, because to me, I think Troy Everett is sure a starter as there is on the offensive side of the ball. And then at left guard, I think Heath Ozida, I'm maybe a 10% slider on him. Like, there's somebody that maybe could take that job, but I sure don't see it happening. So then you've got Logan Howland, who I agree, I think would have been the penciled-in left tackle starter, but him having to miss all offseason and not being able to put on the size that we all know he needs, being able to really work out and do some of those things, that opens the door for a Michael Fasusi, maybe for a Derek Simmons. So there's a lot that is there that can happen. But again, I wonder how much musical chairs he's going to want to play this year, or if it's going to be more of, okay, I know this guy, and this guy, and then I'm going to mess with a couple spots. Like I think that's going to be the interesting thing is how does Bill Bedenbaugh look at this? Is it just like every other spring, or has he got a few spots that are kind of locked in and he wants to build out from there?
There's like, go ahead.
Just one guy that we haven't even talked about that I was
going to bring
curious.
up. There's like four names that kind of get lost in the mix. Go ahead.
Jake Taylor.
Taylor, 100%.
And he was somebody last year that like we had heard had a phenomenal fall. Then he gets hurt, and it was like, oh, he's the missing piece on the offensive line,
right?
And then he just could never be healthy. Like I'm really interested what he looks like, this spring if he's even healthy to go through spring.
Jake Taylor's a good one. The three that come to mind are kind of the guys that were here a year ago as true freshmen that to a certain extent, and Derek Simmons is still another guy that's coming in through the transfer portal. It's going to be a kind of a wait and see how he makes that adjustment. Yep. Obviously, it was a big win when Oklahoma was able to get him out of the portal. What about, obviously, Josh Iasosa out of Edmond? Is he going to be your backup center? We'll see. The other two names, Daniel Akinkume, who obviously redshirted a year ago, and then Isaiah Autry-Dent, who he made steps at the end of last year, being promoted from the scout team. All of a sudden, he was suiting up and really kind of the next guy in line if there was an injury at tackle in the bowl game. Those are four interesting names when you add in Jake Taylor that are going to be guys that I think are going to be needed to take that next step this season.
It just feels like they have a lot of guys you're like, I like the idea of that guy.
Sure.
But you don't know, like, are they actually going to come through? And
that's scary.
Yeah, it is scary, but I also think that it's pretty clear they have more depth. At least it feels like they have a lot more depth this year. I just don't know how talented they are overall, especially some of the older guys. We got to see some of these guys. Like Heath Ozida was good to end the season. He's got to take another step, right? If this group as a whole is going to be a good unit, he has to take another step. Same with, a Jacob Sexton when he's healthy. Troy Everett needs to take another step. Like all of these guys, if they want to be a better unit, which I think they will be a better unit than a year ago because they were not very good a year ago. But if they want to be in the top half of the SEC, which I think they can be, they need some of these guys to take a step, or some of these young guys like a Michael Fasusi or Ryan Foje to steal some jobs.
Be super important for Oklahoma to have a good offensive line to be able to protect John Mateer. The flip side of that, when you get past the offensive line, you're going to notice a theme here in the storyline preview going into Thursday for Oklahoma, sticking to the offensive side of the ball, and obviously the guys that are going to be catching the footballs. It was fantastic news, right? When you get the word that Deion Burks is going to be coming back. I think that, just going through some of the clips and remembering what he was and that little snippet that we saw him a year ago, there was a lot to like until the injuries hit him and basically derailed his season. You lose a ton. I think that's obvious. Nick Anderson's at LSU. Brendan Thompson's at Mississippi State. Jalil Farouk is now in College Park at Maryland. Jaquez Petaway at ECU. Andrell Anthony at Duke. J.J. Hester still in the SEC over at Kentucky with Uncle Mark. What do we make of this whole thing? I think that there's going to be a lot of we can break it into two different sections. The returning guys, a Deion Burks, a Zion Raggins, a Zion Kearney, Ivan Carrion, who showed out a little bit in the bowl game. And then, obviously the freshmen and then the newcomers in terms of the transfer portal guys. Let's start with the guys that are returning. What do we want to see from this group? How does it all blend together?
I think it's fascinating, Eddie, because there's been a lot made about the wide receiver room in terms of guys that have left and also all these new guys that are coming in. But somebody like a Zion Kearney, who really, I thought, finished the season strong, obviously had a good bowl game. I know he had a couple drops in the game, but showed some flashes really throughout the year when he got his opportunity. He's somebody that I'm not sure we're talking enough about. Like, if he can take another step, he's somebody that has the size, the athleticism. I don't think he's the fastest guy, but could certainly help this group. And I think that we're so caught up in all these newcomers and new faces, and rightfully so, because I do think that those guys are going to make an impact. But somebody like a Zion Kearney, I'm really interested because this is a big spring for him. Like, this is a spring that he could take advantage of, a lot of, turnover. You see the touchdown here. Like, I think that he could be somebody that we look up in the fall, and maybe he's starting for Oklahoma.
And let me mention, too, before I want to hear your thoughts on some of the returning guys, Josh. Where is Jaden Gibson in terms of the patellar tendon, obviously that cost him a year ago, the entire season? Where's he at in this rehab process? Because I think when you look at the wide receiver unit, if John Mateer is going to have the type of season that everybody around here would expect him or would love for him to have, Jaden Gibson's got to be a part of that mix.
Yeah, for sure. I would doubt he goes through spring, or at least is. I especially don't think he'll be full contact. That's a tough injury to come back from. I would think maybe he's out running, maybe doing some routes and stuff this spring, but in terms of being a full participant, I highly doubt he's out there.
Sure. Josh, what do you think of just in terms of some of the guys that we saw a season ago? Obviously, Jacob Jordan busts onto the scene. I told George he's going to win the Biletnikoff before it's all over. Zion Kearney, Deion Burks. I know that they have some talent down there. Or is it going to pay off having to play some of these young guys a year ago with the experience, the gained experience throughout the season? Are you going to be able to look back and go, you know what? That sucked a year ago, but maybe it was worth it in the long run.
Well, guys, I think more than anything, I think you're going to see, and this kind of bleeds into coaching, but some better utilization. We talked all season long. You've got Zion Raggins running bubble screens and little underneath stuff. He's the fastest guy on the team. Let him run vertical. Like, stop trying to make this more complicated than it has to be. And kind of like me trying to say that word there. So there's stuff there that can be worked with. I know everybody got so excited about Giovanni Gibson, and I get it. Like, I like him a lot too on tape. We'll have to see what it looks like at this level. But Zion Kearney is a similar physical body type. Like, people don't understand until you've been next to that kid. That's a big guy. So I think his ability to be physical. Ivan Carrion was a guy that I had a lot of questions about when he arrived. I thought as the year went on, and especially in that Navy game, I thought he flashed some stuff. He was more physical than I expected him to be. So again, I think there's some things that can be born out of last year and all the problems, because again, kind of like I was just talking about with the offensive line, you've seen some of these guys. You know what it looks like. Okay, let's build from that. We can use Jacob Jordan like this. We can use Zion Raggins like this. We can do, there's all these elements where you don't have to play this guesswork that you do with a lot of these young guys. And it allows you to also, okay, now we've got all these, incoming transfer guys. We know they like this. He likes this route. He looks best when he's breaking out, whatever it may be. So there's a lot of variety, and there's a lot more size. I know last year OU fans got driven nuts by some of the smaller receivers, especially as the injuries mounted up, that just couldn't, that were getting, kind of pushed around in the routes, that kind of stuff. I don't think you're going to see that this year. Oklahoma is big outside.
Sidebar. Carrie started talking in our ear. It scared the shit out of me. I literally almost had an accident on stage here. That was scary. I wasn't prepared for that. Let's talk about some of these new guys, though, because I do think that Oklahoma, obviously, they hit the portal hard at wide receiver. They had to, when you lose as many guys that they did going out, you have to have some coming in. Emmanuel Choice, Elijah Thomas, those guys aren't portal guys. We expect them to be part of the mix here, especially Elijah Thomas. I know we've talked about him, George, in terms of him just impressing here early on during some of the winter workouts back in January. Giovanni Gibson out of Arkansas Pine Bluff, Keontae Lewis, Isaiah Satanga, a little bit of SEC experience, having played at Arkansas, and then Josiah Martin coming in from Cal. I think we start when we're talking about the portal guys. Correct me if I'm wrong. Giovanni Gibson, Keontae Lewis, or is it Isaiah Satanga that we think could have a bigger impact here moving into the spring?
I mean, I think, we've said it on here before, but Giovanni Gibson feels like the guy that has the highest ceiling. Like, he could be a guy that you look up and go, oh, man, like, he's having a hell of a year for Oklahoma. I mean, you look at his stats, and I get it. It wasn't against the best competition, but he was incredibly productive a year ago. So he has the highest ceiling. I think Keontae Lewis, and I've heard good things about him through winter workouts, could just be a really solid player for you. And, he's played at this level, played at Wisconsin.
Some of those guys, just somebody that can go out there and get you maybe 4 for 60.
Yeah, and, kind of like, Geno Lewis. I've used that comparison a few times, but, I think that he could kind of play that role where, he's not going to burn by you or anything like that, but just a solid football player, veteran guy. Like I said, he's played at this level, started his career at Wisconsin, had a couple good years there, and then transferred to Southern Illinois, was super productive for them. So I think he could play. And then I think Isaiah Satania is kind of the wild card. Like, I think you're going to see him on some special team stuff. He's a speedster, kind of a Brennan Thompson replacement. So I think that he'll have to work his way onto the field, but he can help you. And then Josiah Martin, I just feel like he's more of a project. He was a freshman last year at Cal, played a little bit, but he's somebody that I think, it's going to take him a couple years.
Yeah. Josh, what do you think just in terms of the portal guys, or even throw in some of these freshmen? Because I do think that when you're talking about Manny Choice or you're talking about Elijah Thomas,
there's just so many guys.
Elijah Thomas. Yeah. We basically the recruiting rewind every week, or the recruiting report every week was this is what Elijah Thomas did against a bunch of guys out in Eastern Oklahoma.
There's just so many guys that you feel like could end up stepping up, and the reality is, Josh, you only need maybe 2 or 3 of these guys to really be contributors.
Well, yeah, I mean, George, you look at last year's numbers for Washington State. They had 2 receivers over, I believe, 650 yards. And, one of them was, like almost 1,200 yards, the Kyle Williams kid that was just an outstanding player. So, okay, fine. But, guys, I start looking at the numbers, and I think we all expect Deion Burks to kind of be the guy that leads the way. But I know these preseason things, you got to have a little – it's more of like overview. But if I'm going to make a bold prediction in this whole thing – I think Elijah Thomas ends up OU's second leading receiver in yardage. I'm buying in that hard, and I kind of can't believe it, because I was like, he's so raw, he's going to need time, and I'm probably going to end up wrong. But I just love what I'm hearing, all the stuff that some of the things that I thought he was going to really struggle with, he's ahead of his peers. And in some cases ahead of older guys. So I don't know what to make of that, but I think as much as I liked him and as talented as I thought he was, I believe if he wasn't my number 1 all season in state, he was real close to it. I mean, he was kind of my guy, and I think OU might have something pretty special with Elijah Thomas. So he'd be the one I'd lead with. But again, you're right, Giovanni Gibson, freak. Satania, kind of the same deal, vertical speed, get him out in open space. So there are pieces that you like. I don't know that there's any one guy this year that where you say, okay, he's the guy. He's the Hollywood Brown. He's the CeeDee Lamb. I don't know if they have that guy this year, because Burke still has a lot to prove, in my opinion. But I think they've got a lot of good pieces that can fill various roles.
And it's not crazy to think that a true freshman wide receiver could come in and contribute. I mean, you saw it at Alabama and Ohio State. Now, I'm not saying Elijah Thomas is going to be as good as those guys, and those guys were obviously highly touted coming out of high school, and so is Elijah Thomas. But I don't think it's crazy to think that he could come in and be somebody that, I don't know if he starts week 1, but if you told me he's starting by the end of the season, I I would believe you.
Ryan Williams and Jeremiah Smith, I think, have reset the bar when it comes to freshmen coming in and playing early. Josh, and just real quick, just to clarify, it sounds like with Elijah Thomas specifically, it's more so what he's doing in terms of building the hype, not as much as, I guess, against, like, it's because there's nobody else there. He's been that impressive, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
That's a big part of it. Like, it's not, I mean, again, I won't say that part of what I'm responding to, or like when I see, okay, the weight he's already put on, when I'm seeing some of that talk, when I see some of the testing stuff he's putting up, guys, he's testing like receivers that are 25 pounds lighter than him. Like, it's crazy some of the stuff he's doing, especially when you consider this isn't a guy that went to DeSoto or South Oak Cliff or one of these programs where all day long he was with elite athletes and he's never been in a place where guys are as talented as he is. And to watch him go to Oklahoma and his numbers still stand out, you're like, okay, like something works there beyond even a level that I expected. And again, we talked about this guy for 2 years. Like, we knew he was really talented. But Eddie, kind of like when he showed up on Under Armour in Dallas last spring, you're just like, this is better than I thought it was going to be, and I already thought it was going to be really good. So I think this, again, George is absolutely right. Ryan Williams, Jeremiah Smith, let's not get too crazy. But, again, I think this could be a guy. And again, I hate to make this comparison because it puts a lot at his feet. But kind of like what you saw of CeeDee Lamb his freshman year at Oklahoma, where he came along, his role got bigger and bigger and bigger as the year went on. And by, going into his sophomore year, you're like, okay, that dude's special. Like, you kind of knew it. I could see a similar storyline.
And I would just build on top of that and say that, it's almost kind of rare nowadays when you go to a high school game or you go to a camp setting like that. And there's something about these guys that, get to that elite level that they produce every single time, and there's no questions about it. It's, well, he was double covered or they tried to take him out of it. It doesn't usually matter. And when you look at Elijah Thomas and what he was able to do at Shakota over the last couple seasons, specifically this past senior season, it was every game, every weekend. He was doing something that was like, holy shit, we need to put that in the recruiting report. And there it was. So I want to talk more about Deion Burks, but it's going to be kind of a part of another storyline that we'll get into. But first, this will be our halftime. Let's take a time out and tell you about our good friends over at William & Lauren, the official custom clothier of OU football. William & Lauren outfits your favorite OU players in custom suits that boost their confidence off the field to match their confidence on the field. Perfectly tailored clothing ensures every Sooner stands out in comfort and style at prices that make luxury accessible. Visit William & Lauren in Oklahoma City or online at williamandlauren.com. That is williamandlauren.com. Dress like a champion and make your style as legendary as Oklahoma football. A couple weeks away from you going to get fitted, right?
Yeah, I'm excited. I think you'll be there too.
Yeah, I think I will. Now, are you still going to go with the capri pants?
No. I'm going with the classic black suit, Eddie.
Okay, I like that.
No capri pants.
That's going to look good. That's going to bow tie or tie?
I think a regular tie.
Yeah, I like that a lot.
Yeah.
It's going to look good. Thank you to our friends over at William & Lauren, and they'll have the brick and mortar up in the 918 as well here opening up in the coming months. Be excited to go over there in the Oklahoma City location, williamandlauren.com. They've been with us all season long as we roll into spring football. All right, it's about that time. We've talked about the offense, and I know that we didn't talk about the running backs, which, by the way, I did say on the stickball report that I did with Bob Brisbillo earlier today. You can see that here on SoonerScoop.com's YouTube channel. It sounds like from a baseball side of things, Taylor Tatum's kind of going through a little bit of an injury. I know that Skip talked about it right at the beginning of the season. We'll see how that bleeds over to Thursday. That might be something that comes up with Brent Venables on Wednesday. Check back. We'll obviously be reporting on that.
Is he practicing for football as well? Is he going to go through spring?
As far as I know, him and James Nesta will both go through spring ball while going through baseball.
I mean, Kyler Murray did that.
Yeah, and it was tough for Kyler. I mean, obviously a little bit maybe more when you're going through a somewhat of a quarterback competition, or you're moving into the quarterback role and then going over and hitting bombs over at Eldell like Kyler did. That was pretty incredible to a certain extent. We'll see. Taylor hasn't played this season. I don't know if they're trying to redshirt him on the baseball side of things or if it's an injury or if it's just the sheer amount of guys in the outfield right now that they're trying to juggle between. But we'll continue to kind of delve into that as the baseball season unfolds. A little bit running back talk. We'll talk about tight ends never. As far as defense, there is a big question mark when you're talking about leadership, right? And I think that when you look at the leaders that are departing from the Oklahoma program, you think of Danny Stutsman, you think of Billy Bowman, you think of Ethan Downs, you think of Woody Washington, obviously. Some of those guys that really did well for themselves up at the Combine over the course of this past weekend. But who are some of these guys? When you're talking about leadership, and, Josh, you had mentioned it earlier, when you look at the defense that they're returning on paper and some of the guys that are coming in to help, as well as some of the freshmen that are expected to take on new roles within the defense, you lose a lot when you're talking about 376 tackles for Danny Stutsman, or 110 tackles from Ethan Downs, or 54 tackles from Billy Bowman, and all the interceptions that he leaves Oklahoma with. Who are some of the guys that kind of come to mind when you're thinking about leadership on the defensive side of the football, and especially here through spring?
Yeah, it's interesting because OU does return 11 of 19 guys that had over 200 snaps a year ago on defense, which is great. That's awesome. You have a lot of guys that played, good football for you and a lot of football for you last year, but it is a question mark. And I think the obvious answer is guys like Kip Lewis, Kobe McKenzie, right? Guys that played a lot a year ago. R. Mason Thomas, I think, needs to step up and be a more vocal leader. But on the back end, Robert Spears Jennings, who had a, great start to last year. I think he had a good year overall, but maybe didn't finish as strong. Peyton Bowen, wasn't a huge factor a year ago. You'd like to see him take another step. Corner, I don't really know who's the leader at corner. Is it Eli Bowen as a true sophomore? I don't know. I think Jacoby Johnson is somebody that could step up. Cheetah position is going to be fascinating.
On the quarterback or the cornerback thing, like, what the hell are you going to get from somebody like a Gentry Williams?
Yeah.
And that's been
is he even healthy?
Question. Right.
Is he even healthy this spring? I don't know. So while I think there's some obvious answers, I think there needs to also be some guys that maybe we're not talking about emerge as leaders, right? A Dominic Williams needs to be a leader in the interior, right? He comes back for another season. Like, he needs to be, I think DJ Terry was kind of that leader a year ago for that group. You need Dominic Williams to kind of fill that role. Jaden Jackson played a ton of football for you last year. I know he's only going to be a true sophomore, but he needs to step up. So there's a lot of guys, but for me, it starts in the middle, and I think Kobe McKenzie. I love Kip Lewis. I love the energy he plays with. But if you've got the green dot, like Kobe McKenzie's going to have the green dot, and Danny was obviously a great leader the last few years, he has some big shoes to fill at that middle linebacker spot.
Danny's one of those guys that I think he reached a level of, like, so good, I guess, to say, for a lack of better terms, that he would go out and have a very average night, but still give you double-digit tackles, integral part of that defense and calling everything out there. It's going to be interesting to see how Brent works with some of these linebackers, specifically somebody like a Kobe who, I think it does help. He's had a couple years with them. They understand the language that they're talking about.
Yeah, and I think Danny was so good last year and really the last couple of years that when Kobe came in, it wasn't that he wasn't playing well, but it was noticeable when Danny wasn't on the field for that defense. Like, it was same with Billy Bowman to an extent, but that's where it's like, okay, Kobe needs to take another step and kind of be that guy, in the middle of the defense.
Josh, who are some of the guys that you're thinking of when you're talking about leadership going into the first practice on Thursday?
Well, guys, when I look at the defense, there's two that stick out to me, and it's largely about the way they just play. I honestly, knowing both of them a little bit, it's more of the way they just live and are. But Kip Lewis and Kendall Dolby, those are two guys that you'll follow anytime. They play with just endless energy. They're always running hot. Like, they're the kind of guys that a coach says, we want you to do what they do every snap. We need you to be like that. At the same time, most guys can't live like that, and most guys find that a little nauseating. So I think it's hard sometimes for those guys to be like the clear leaders. Like, when you are always like at a 10, not everybody else can get there with you. I think Kobe is a really good possibility. I also think, and I mean that kind of because I think he is a good balance to those guys, where Kobe is very level, very even keeled. Like, he, not that he doesn't play with energy, he absolutely does, but he's not a guy that runs so hot that sometimes you worry, like, is he, like, do we have to reel him in a little bit here? The other I would say is Robert Spears Jennings. Again, a similar personality type, very steady, very calm demeanor, like just a guy that is kind of, going about his business. Now, the thing you have to do with guys like that is make sure they are, stepping into that role and being leaders rather than just like, kind of going with the flow, because I think to some degree that is their nature. But I saw a quote that, Kobe had with Bob, talking about people kind of following him. And I think that is, if you have that, then you have to step into those roles. Like, that you are a guy that people look to. And I can believe that with both these guys. They're veteran players. They played a lot of football for Oklahoma. They know this defense. And at the same time, they are guys who, again, just being around them, they command a certain level of respect. Like, you just kind of feel, I cover these guys in high school, and there are some guys you're like, that's just a goofy dude, man. He's a goofy guy. He's always going to be that way, and that's fine. And then there are some guys you're like, that guy has a vision for the next 20 years of his life. And that's kind of what I would get from guys like Kobe, like Robert. They kind of just had a different point of view than maybe some others. And I think that maturity can help OU. And maybe it's not like last year. I think that's the thing people have to understand. It's not going to be last year where you had two clear leaders in Billy and Danny, and everybody knew it kind of ran through them. This year, I think it may be more of a group thing where you're going to have several guys that are going to have to speak up at the right time and the right moment for themselves, rather than like we all just turn to Danny or Billy and wait for them to say what we need to say.
I think because he comes off so quiet to us sometimes, and he started to talk a lot more in front of the media setting at the end of last season, but I think R. Mason Thomas is a lot bigger leader within that defensive core than we probably think on the outside. And then obviously when you get somebody like a Kendall Dolby back, I just love watching him play football.
Gosh, I just hope he's back to himself.
100%. That's what I was about to say. You just hope that, the leg injury, that was a traumatic injury to end his season against Tennessee. You just hope everything's okay and he can get back to where he was. And then you add in, somebody like it. I don't know how much leadership they can add because they're obviously going through their first spring, but even a guy like a Kendall Daniels and Marvin Jones Jr., both of those guys have played a ton of college football. This is not going to be necessarily new to them as much as it is kind of ingratiating themselves within the program.
And they could compete for starting jobs. I mean, these are two guys that started at big programs a year ago. I mean, Kendall Daniels obviously was super impactful at Oklahoma State the last few years. And then Marvin Jones Jr., I know, hasn't had the career that he probably expected to have, but he's been a good player, and he started for Florida State a year ago. So, I think both of those guys could add some leadership to that group. And then even I'm fascinated by the young guys because I do think they have some really good young talent that we just saw flashes of, and that's at every line of the defense, whether that's a David Stone up front, a Michael Boganowski on the back end, who I think is going to get some playing time. Reggie Powers, I think, playing some cheetah. What's that look like? Like, they've got a lot of, young talent. Like what Jeremiah Newcombe, the guy that we didn't hear a ton about last year, but maybe he can find some playing time this year at corner. So
Jaden Hardy in that mix as well.
Yeah, Jaden Hardy. I mean, they've got a lot of really young, talented players that I love the experience Oklahoma's bringing back, but those young guys are going to push some of those older guys for some playing time.
It's a good problem to have, I think, especially when you're talking about a defensive side of the ball that has made significant jumps from year 1 to year 2 to year 3. You would think. I was talking to Peyton Bowen about this. We had him on radio over at One Oklahoma, and it's like, for the first time, he basically said, for the first time, I'm going into a spring where I know everything that we're talking about from a language standpoint when we're talking about the defense. And we're talking about a guy that's going into his 3rd year now.
And that sounds like Billy Bowman, right? A year ago, Billy Bowman's like, hey, this is the first time I feel actually really comfortable because it was his 3rd year in the system. And so maybe you see a big, huge leap from a guy like Peyton Bowen, who I think has all the talent in the world. It just didn't always click for him.
We're going to talk about Peyton Bowen because that kind of leads into the next storyline on, it could be on either side of the football, but we basically asked you, and we've kind of pre-prepared this, who's a guy that is returning from last year's team that really needs to step up in 2025? Like, when is the light going to come on for whomever? Let's start with you, George. You mentioned Jacoby Johnson. You talked about the quarterback position, maybe a little bit thin as they head into spring. We'll see if they answer some of those questions through the transfer portal. But It seems like, coming out of a year where he had to flip between, okay, they need help at wide receiver. It seems like I don't know if he's going to try to do both sides of the football, but at cornerback specifically, that was a position that he continued to grow throughout the year.
I really like his potential, and I think the more he got to play, the more you got to see kind of his skill set. And he had some, freshman moments or young moments a year ago, playing that corner spot because he was starting there for a little bit. But I think he could take a huge leap this year. And I know there's other guys like a Danny Okoye, PJ Adebawore, like some of those guys that you'd love to see take another step. But I want to see Jacoby Johnson win that starting job at the beginning of the season. And I think that starts this spring. And I think his athleticism and just his ability on the field is really good. And I understand why he had to go play wide receiver. I don't want to see that this year. I want to see him focus on one position, entering year 3 now. So I chose him just because I liked what I saw from him at the end of last season. And I think that's a position where you love what you have in Eli Bowen, but it's kind of a question mark at that other spot. And I think he could really earn a starting job there this spring.
Josh, we were just talking about him, but you had mentioned Peyton Bowen entering his 3rd year. It seems like, for the former 5-star out of Denton Guyer, this would be the year that the light comes on for Peyton Bowen.
Well, I don't think it's a coincidence that George and I have both picked players in the secondary. To me, there's no bigger question as far as like what this team can be, what the total ceiling is, than how this secondary comes along. Like, what can it be? Where can it go? And I think when you're talking about physical skill sets and the ability to help Oklahoma most immediately, it's probably the 2 guys we've just talked about, Jacoby Johnson and Peyton Bowen. Peyton Bowen, again, former 5-star, was a guy that everybody wanted. We knew that he is very much of that Billy Bowman kind of model where he's not the biggest guy in the world, but all the guy does is make football plays. And as a freshman, I thought you saw that from Peyton Bowen a lot. You're like, okay, this is all trending in the right direction. There's just some veteran guys in front of him, and once that passes, it's just going to be off to the races for him. And then last year, it seemed like he was kind of fighting some nagging injuries, nothing too serious that really held him out, but he never really was just Peyton Bowen. Like, he didn't look quite right all year, and I don't know, exactly like if that's all of it. If he just comes back and now he's healthy and he understands everything like you guys were talking about, does that just open the door for him? If it does, then again, I think Oklahoma could have one of the most surprising players in the SEC as far as maybe what the national narrative is, where most people have kind of forgotten Peyton Bowen from his recruiting days. He has every ability in the world to go be an all SEC level player. Like that is in the range of outcomes for Peyton Bowen. And if he can do that, then again, it shores up a lot of the problems that I feel, of the few questions you have of this Oklahoma defense, I think they almost all are in the secondary.
Next guy that comes to mind when you're talking about people that need to step up, and we just talked about the wide receiver position, and maybe a little bit awkward to include him, but I do think it fits the mold of somebody that has to have a big year. What's Deion Burks going to be? I think that we got a little bit of a taste of it last year, obviously, before the injuries derailed the season, but the little bit that we did see, whether it be the Temple game when he had the 3 touchdowns or some of the glimpses through the first quarter of the Tennessee game, it seems like that Deion Burks, he has to take a next step for Oklahoma.
And I think Eddie too. It's what's he look like in Ben Arbuckle's offense, because it felt like too, even when he was healthy a year ago, they didn't do a great job of getting him open, getting him vertical down the field. And I'm not saying he needs to just run a bunch of 9 balls, but they need to find different ways to get him the ball a little bit further down the field. It felt like they didn't do a great job. And then the biggest thing for Deion, just staying healthy. His inability to stay healthy, and that's obviously not all his fault, right? But I'm interested to see, did he do anything different this offseason to make sure that he can stay on the field, for the entire season or the most of the season? Because when he's out there, he's obviously an electric player, and I think that in this system, Ben Arbuckle's going to do some cool things with him that can get him the ball in different ways.
Josh, how good can Deion Burks be?
Eddie, I think that's the $1 million question, man. Like, when I saw him in the spring, you're like, oh, okay, this guy's going to be 1 year in and 1 year out in Norman. Like, there's no question. He looks special. And then in the season, it was so tough to ever gauge what was happening? Like, was he struggling because the offense was predictable and didn't seem to put him in very good positions? Or was he struggling because maybe he wasn't the guy we all thought he was? I tend to think it's the former. I think there's a lot of ability here. He's clearly incredibly strong. He's very fast. Like, there's all these tools there that say, okay, this guy should be really good. What I think is going to benefit him a lot this year, guys, and it's kind of like what George was just talking about. It's not, like, oh, he's just got to run vertical routes. But I feel like Ben Arbuckle is going to be able to scheme him open. And I didn't see a lot of that last year where, okay, Oklahoma did, this in the first quarter, and in the second quarter, because they showed, whoever it may be, this look, okay, now we snuck Deion Burks behind the corner, and now we found a little room for him to work. And you can let, again, that speed, that power, all these things, you can let that come to bear and really be a threat. We didn't see that last year. So I think we're going to see him not only do some things because of his natural skill set, but maybe be able to find some confidence, find a little groove with John Mateer because of some of the stuff that I think Ben Arbuckle can scheme up for him in this passing game to create some easier opportunities that we see, we saw for years under Lincoln Riley, for years under previous staffs, and last year were just non-existent, where Oklahoma everything looked so hard. And with a guy like Deion Burks, if you can just give him a little room, make it a little easier, I think there's ability there for him to be a difference maker.
One more guy to get through in terms of a guy returning that we kind of expect, or he needs to be expected to make that turn. And we talked about it last year. Jaden Jackson and David Stone are always going to be connected, obviously, because of the way they came in together. Jaden Jackson has a phenomenal All-American season as a freshman. It seems like this is the moment for David Stone to, quote unquote, arrive, if you will. And we saw him get a little bit more play, a little bit more snaps at the end of the season. I thought he played pretty damn well in the bowl game against Navy, but I'm very excited to see what David Stone can become here, not just over the spring session, but going into August.
Well, and I think, too, you love what you have in Dominic Williams, Jaden Jackson, Grayson Halton. Those are all three players that are going to play a lot of football for Oklahoma. But David Stone feels like somebody that could be a difference maker. He's a guy that can rush the passer. You can do some different things with him. You can move him around on the interior. And while you love those other guys, David Stone's ceiling is just higher. And if he can come in and be a dominant force, whether that's rushing the passer in the run game, whatever it is, it just feels like he could make some monster plays for Oklahoma next year. And I think that you have several guys like that on the defensive line, which is why a lot of people think it's the strength of their team. But, I mean, he could make, game-changing plays next year. And that's why you'd love to see him. I'm not saying he needs to be a superstar, but you'd love to see him start showing a lot more flashes. And not to say he didn't a year ago. He just didn't have as much playing time, and he had the, I think, hand injury late in the season. But you'd love to see him take a big step this year.
Josh, we've been talking about David Stone since he was a sophomore over at Dell City High School, and we were watching him start for the Eagles. Doesn't it seem like this is the moment for him to really kind of arrive in Norman?
Eddie, it's really interesting you brought this up, but I mean, the first time I really watched David Stone in a game, he was wrecking some team from northern Oklahoma City, the Panthers, something like that. It was.
I believe that is correct. I believe that is correct. Those were during the down years. We're back in the playoffs, Josh. How'd West do this year?
Oh no, I deserve that. All right, but no, I do. George brings up a really good point where it's so easy, and I think I have done it a few times, where you look at it and you say, well, that defensive tackle room is just rock solid because you've got three guys that are very experienced, very good players. And Jaden Jackson, you're like, well, he's only just going to keep getting better, which I believe to be true. But with David Stone, there's a level there that he can get to that I just don't think others can quite reach. Like, if he can put all the pieces together, you're like, okay, that's a first-round pick at defensive tackle if all the things fall in place. And, guys, what I love and what makes me buy into this for David Stone is everything you've heard since he arrived was like, he's not the five-star guy that shows up and has attitude or acts like he's owed anything. Talking to David, there was never certainly I think recruiting became chaotic for him at times, but he never was a guy that I felt like changed. He was still that same kind of just funny kid that just kind of went through and dealt with recruiting as it came. And everything I've heard just tells me that's continued in Norman. He's bought in. He's doing all the things he needs to do. Every time I hear, that he's working a little extra, he's doing this with this trainer. Like, he really is a guy that puts in a lot of time. And if he can do that with his physical talent, guys, kind of like we were talking about earlier with Elijah, would it shock me if at the end of the year David Stone's a starting defensive tackle on this team? No, it wouldn't. I think he has that kind of ability. And, then you start, again, I know at that point you start looking at 26 and, okay, you look at your center, your defensive line there with Jackson and Stone and really having that rock, those two kind of big rocks in the middle of your defense. But yeah, I think it's crazy to me how quickly it's kind of moved. Like, all this focus is Danny Okoye, and I get it. We all know I'm all in on Danny Okoye, but it feels like everybody's kind of forgotten the little old 5-star from a year ago that played as a true freshman in the SEC.
I think that there's going to be, obviously a lot of hype that surrounds somebody like a Danny Okoye, and we'll talk about him, I would imagine, over the next couple of weeks as Oklahoma gets underway with spring football, and even somebody like a PJ Adebawore. I think that, as you start looking at the calendar, that thing's shifting over and he's moving into his third year, you need to see something from him. At least, if nothing else, maybe a couple flashes here during spring or in practice so you can move into next season and go, okay, maybe this guy can be somebody that you count on moving forward. A number of visitors this weekend, Josh. The Future Freaks weekend coming up this weekend in Norman. You have the list. The Sooner Scoop posted on Sunday. Goes over damn near everybody that is going to be here. But when you're talking about storylines going into Oklahoma's first major recruiting weekend, I guess, if you will, since school has started. I guess they had the junior day. But really, this seems like a little bit. I guess I'll just ask you, is this like a bigger weekend than a junior day? The Future Freaks?
I think it is, guys, because you're looking at, and you do have a junior day list where we've got 6, 11, 12 guys confirmed right now that are in that 2026 class, the junior group coming in. But then you've still got like 15, 20 sophomores. Even down into, you've got roughly a dozen of this, guys who are ending their freshman year going into their sophomore season. So there's a lot being built here, not just for this class, but going forward, the future, what Oklahoma hopes to do. Obviously, their first big opportunity to kind of roll Jim Nagy out in front of everybody and say, hey, look at this. This is the kind of talent we attract. This is his background. This is all the NFL, all you guys. It's one of those moments where Brent Venables walks into a room and says, Who here wants to play in the Senior Bowl? Who here, has watched the Senior Bowl at home? And every single hand in the room goes up and said, this guy ran it for a decade and knows every scout in the NFL. Like that kind of stuff where you can really start to flex that aspect of Jim Nagy's background. So I think this is going to be a huge weekend. There are still more names still being confirmed. Drew Evers, the big offensive lineman, Nick's younger brother, he confirmed he'll be in earlier today. Another one that was just recently added was Jordan Edmonds, a top 40 overall player in the class, cornerback from Georgia. He'll be in. A guy from Sprayberry, the same school that once produced Trey Sermon. So there's a lot that can happen here. There's going to be some guys that are here this weekend that will end up as Oklahoma Sooners. It's just mathematically going to happen. So you get to kind of watch those storylines and see what comes out. And again, of course, the probably most interesting storyline, the one that captivates everybody right now, Bo Bentley will be back on campus. We get to see what that means, and kind of follow up on just what is happening at quarterback in 2026, which is kind of just an open book that we're all kind of following along as it goes.
Josh, other than Bo Bentley, because I feel like we've talked a lot about that, but who are some of the other top names, guys that are going to be on there that are a big priority for Oklahoma?
I think one of the ones I would really focus on, and I brought him up a few times, is Tavian Branch, the big defensive lineman from Pennsylvania. Is a guy that's kind of been a late riser. You can tell Oklahoma identified him really early on for being a guy that's not really in their normal recruiting circles. But guys, I said it last time, This feels like Trent Wilson, where Oklahoma has just put a lot of work into him very early on and made it clear to him he's a priority. And now this kid's coming out, again, like I always say, on his own dime, he's making this visit to check out Oklahoma. I think that's going to be huge. And who knows, maybe he is this year's Trent Wilson, where Oklahoma kind of surprises everybody, gets a commitment, and then just holds on to it until signing day. Another one, we talked a lot about 26, but 27 quarterback Peyton Houston, clearly one of their focuses in that class, is expected to be back on campus this weekend. And, he is a guy that I saw a couple of weeks ago at Under Armour. He was very impressive. Is a guy that, one of those guys, and, when you go to camps often enough, you see it, certain guys that people are just drawn to and they just kind of gravitate toward. And Peyton Houston's, he's very confident. He has that, kind of swagger about him. He's a nice kid. I don't want to make it sound like it's something it's not, but he definitely is a guy that players know when he's around. And so I think that'll be very telling with some of the other guys that will be on campus. But yeah, again, the thing that I think will please OU fans the most, a lot of good linemen on campus, whether it's offensive line, defensive line. You've got Caden Penny from Bixby coming down. Vincent Johnson, a guy from Sulphur Springs that camped at OU last summer, really loved it. He's making a trip back up. So there are a lot of guys here that, can be part of that foundation as OU continues to try and build those offensive line and defensive line rooms in the coming years.
Not to say that it's anything new, but, I think that when you look at the success that a front office like the Philadelphia Eagles has had, Howie Roseman's been pretty upfront. You build through the offensive line, you build through the defensive line, and then everything else, for the most part, I don't want to say it takes care of itself, but it kind of sort of does when you're really good up front. Real quick, I know the spring stuff, the spring game weekend stuff is still relatively new, but we have talked about how big a spring game weekend is in the recruiting world. Are guys, I would imagine, still going to be invited to the Crimson Combine? And I wonder what the reception for something like that will be, as opposed to if you're a kid from Dallas or Houston, do you go somewhere else that weekend knowing that you're not really going to be missing much per se when it comes to, actual on-field stuff when it comes to a game?
Year one's going to be interesting, and I feel like it's going to be a lot about marketing. Because what you're saying is right, Eddie. There's not, for a while there, it kind of looked like Oklahoma was going to be one of the few schools that was going to hang on to the spring game and was going to be able to say, hey, we actually are going to have an event that's not, water balloon fights or whatever they end up coming up with to make it, an engagement type of thing. With this, though, again, I think it's going to be how well can OU build enthusiasm, build an idea of this is going to be a big event. And again, there's already multiple guys who have confirmed they'll be there that weekend, including, Caden Hall, the big safety from Florida that came in and liked his junior day visit so much in January, top 50 player in the country. He's expected to come back. Well, now, does that change when this isn't a spring game? And how does Oklahoma attack that? Part of me, Eddie, really wonders, and again, like you said, this is also new, that I don't know that it's all been mapped out perfectly yet. What my guess is this turns in to a little more like a junior day visit weekend, where it's not going to be 40 or 50 or 60 guys, but maybe 15, guys they know, that are all those guys are takes. Not we like him, we're going to keep evaluating, but really being able to shower those guys with attention right before official visit season kind of comes in. And you can really kind of have that last big punch, and then, hey, we're going to bring you back on June 20th for the barbecue, or June 6th, whichever of the visit weekends work out. So that's and that, again, I want to say it's purely an educated guess at what I think is going to happen, but that's kind of my feeling, because you're going to have all this other stuff going on, and especially in this first year when you don't know what fan response is going to be like, you don't know, what the turnout's going to be like. You don't want to make it into this huge event and then 15,000 fans are there or something like that. You've got to be careful how much you commit to that until you really know kind of what it really will be.
And who knows? I mean, maybe we're looking at this the wrong way. Maybe this is the exact opposite of what I think it's going to be, just in terms of maybe the coaches say, hey, we don't have a game. We could spend an entire day with them down on the field as they go through the combine stuff. And maybe you are getting more out of it from a recruiting angle than you would in past years when they actually had a game. I don't know. We'll have to see how it all kind of comes together here. And obviously with, still a month away or more than a month away, it's going to be interesting to see kind of how it all comes together from a recruiting angle. Certainly important, as is this weekend with Oklahoma opening up spring football on Thursday. Once again, we'll be talking to damn near everybody that is associated with the program outside of some of the returning guys on Wednesday. It's going to be a bonanza, I believe is what I'm
You ever
terming
see
it.
the show Bonanza?
I know what you're talking about, but I don't know if I've actually sat down for it. I think is that a Nick at Night operation?
Well, I think it was like a old school Western,
Oh.
Wild West show, right?
Yeah, sure. I've heard
Yeah,
the name.
that-
I've heard my parents talk about it, but yeah, I haven't sat down to
I like
watch it.
that George knows I'm old enough. He keeps looking at me like
Yeah.
maybe Josh knows.
Josh,
the
did you
answer
watch
to this question. Yeah.
Bonanza growing up?
Now I can honestly say too old even for me. Like my dad watched Bonanza. Like that's kind of the thing we're talking about here. So definitely older, but you're not wrong in that it became a fixture of Nick at Night, and that's the only time I've had any exposure to it. I love a good Western movie. I don't think I've ever seen a Western TV show. Like I don't think I've ever watched one from beginning to end.
1959 to 1973, 14 seasons of Bonanza.
My
So,
dad
yeah,
watched Bonanza when he was a kid, so I watched it.
Just missed it.
So-
what were they doing? Protecting the border?
No, I think it takes place maybe in like Colorado, actually.
Really? All right. Well, they're a neighbor
I think.
state.
I don't know. I can't remember.
You used to live in Colorado. You should know that.
Yeah.
All right. It was good to talk football today. It does seem like, if they're going to take away the spring game, at least we still do have practices and all that kind of stuff. And it's going to be very intriguing because I think that, when we come out of tomorrow and we come out of Wednesday, there's going to be a lot of talk about what Brent Venables has to say. We kind of talked about it on Monday.
And Jim Nagy.
And Jim Nagy, as well as John Mateer. Like all three of those guys in the AM session of what it's going to be on Wednesday over at the stadium. Very, very intriguing.
Yeah. Also, programming note, unofficial 40 for those who listen to that. That'll be on Thursday
Very good.
because
Very
we're
good.
going to be too busy tomorrow.
Going to be very busy tomorrow.
Those of who listen to it, all of you listen to it or should. So there's no excuses.
And if you don't listen to it, just download it and turn it on mute.
I mean,
At
this
least
kind
give us a
of
click.
this kind of turned into like a unofficial 40 a
It
day
was.
early.
It was.
So
And it's on video, so you can watch it as we go through some of the storylines. That's going to do it for a official spring preview here.
Yep.
Next time we talk to you will be on Wednesday, coming out of the AM session with all those guys, John Mateer, Brent Venables, and Jim Nagy, with an instant reaction here on SoonerScoop.com's YouTube channel. And then obviously Wednesday evening is just going to be basically every video that comes out of it. You can see all the interviews and talking to some of the new faces, like an Elijah Thomas, like a Giovanni Gibson,
Michael Fasusi.
Michael Fasusi, Ryan Foje, a number of guys that we're going to be speaking to on Wednesday evening. So for George and Josh, I'm Eddie. We'll see you back here on the SoonerScoop.com YouTube channel. Subscribe, like, do all that. Bye-bye.